The boardroom was already celebrating when the janitor spoke. Champagne flutes waited along the wall, screens glowed with numbers that could reshape entire industries, and the future of a $10 billion deal shimmered in the air like a promise already fulfilled. No one noticed the man pushing the cleaning cart near the door, his shoulders slightly hunched from years of night shifts and heavier years of grief. But when he paused, looked at the screen, and quietly said one sentence that cut through the room like a blade, everything stopped. In that instant, a deal worth more than cities, reputations, and careers froze mid-breath, and the power in the room shifted in a way no one could have predicted. Before we go any further, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the idea that wisdom can come from the most unexpected places, take a moment right now to like this video, comment your thoughts, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps stories like this reach hearts that need them. The man was named Daniel Reyes, though most people in the building only knew him as the night janitor with tired eyes and a soft nod. He was a single father, raising his 8-year-old daughter alone since illness had taken his wife 3 years earlier. Life had not shattered all at once, it had chipped away piece by piece, hospital bills replacing savings, sleepless nights replacing dreams, and pride slowly giving way to necessity. Daniel took the janitor job not because he lacked ambition, but because it allowed him to be present for his daughter's mornings and still earn enough to keep the lights on. He cleaned offices where people debated futures he once dreamed of building himself, quietly carrying a past no one bothered to ask about. Years before, Daniel had been an engineer, the kind who loved systems not for profit but for their elegance. He believed that every problem had a human cost hidden behind the numbers. When his wife fell sick, promotions were declined, travel assignments refused, and eventually his position was eliminated during a restructuring that called itself efficient. The title disappeared, but the mind remained. Late at night, after his daughter slept, Daniel still read industry reports, followed mergers, and studied market movements, not out of bitterness but habit. Knowledge had become his refuge, a reminder that he was more than his uniform. On the day of the deal, Daniel was assigned to clean the executive floor earlier than usual. The building buzzed with anticipation, executives moving faster, assistants whispering urgently, security unusually alert. The boardroom doors were open, revealing a massive screen filled with projections and legal frameworks. Daniel worked silently, but his eyes caught fragments of information as he wiped tables and polished glass. It was impossible not to notice the scale of what was unfolding. A global acquisition, touted as revolutionary, poised to dominate markets and reshape supply chains across continents. The numbers were impressive, but something about them felt wrong. As Daniel lingered near the doorway, he noticed a small inconsistency buried deep within the risk assessment slide. It was subtle, almost invisible unless one had spent years living inside models like these. A regulatory assumption had been simplified, a human variable reduced to a line item, and the margin of error quietly ignored. Daniel's chest tightened, not with excitement, but with a familiar sense of warning. He had seen this before, long ago, when decisions made in clean rooms had consequences felt in crowded hospitals and struggling neighborhoods. This deal, as flawless as it appeared, carried a flaw that could unravel not just profits but lives. He hesitated, knowing his place, knowing the unspoken rules. He was the janitor. He was invisible. But he was also a father who taught his daughter to speak up when something felt wrong. The weight of that lesson pressed on him as the room erupted in applause over projected returns. And then, almost against his will, Daniel spoke. It was not loud or dramatic. It was a single sentence, carefully chosen, pointing out the overlooked assumption and its inevitable collapse under real-world conditions. The words hung in the air, fragile yet undeniable. Silence followed, thick and uncomfortable. Heads turned, some in irritation, others in disbelief. Security shifted. The board members stared, not at the screen anymore, but at the man in the janitor's uniform who had dared interrupt their triumph. In most rooms, that would have been the end of it. A dismissal, a removal, a return to invisibility. But the CEO, a woman known for her sharp instincts and even sharper control, did not react the way anyone expected. She did not laugh. She did not order him out. She simply looked back at the screen, then at Daniel, and then asked for the presentation to pause. The room resisted at first, pride bristling against interruption. Advisors murmured, lawyers shifted, egos flared. Yet the CEO insisted, replaying the slide Daniel had referenced. Slowly, reluctantly, the flaw emerged, first as a question, then as a concern, and finally as a realization that spread through the room like a cold wave. What Daniel had seen was real. The deal, rushed by ambition and competition, had underestimated a regulatory response that could trigger fines, public backlash, and long-term instability. $10 billion balanced on a fragile assumption, and one sentence had exposed it. Daniel stood there, heart pounding, fully expecting consequences. He thought of his daughter, of the groceries he needed to buy, of the rent due at the end of the month. He wondered if he had just destroyed the small stability he had fought so hard to maintain. But beneath the fear was a quiet certainty that he had done the right thing. Sometimes, integrity costs more than silence, but silence costs more in the end. The CEO dismissed the room temporarily, something unheard of at such a critical moment. Executives filed out, stunned and unsettled, leaving Daniel alone in a space never meant for him. She asked about his background, not with condescension, but curiosity. Daniel shared his story without embellishment, speaking of his past career, his wife, his daughter, and the path that had led him here. There was no bitterness in his words, only honesty. He did not ask for anything. He did not defend himself. He simply explained how he saw the world and why he spoke. What happened next stunned not just the boardroom, but the entire company. The deal was halted, not quietly revised, but publicly paused. Analysts buzzed, headlines speculated, and stock prices wavered. Internally, an independent review was launched, confirming Daniel's concern and uncovering additional risks buried beneath layers of optimism. The $10 billion deal, once celebrated, was ultimately restructured into a smaller, more ethical partnership that prioritized long-term stability over short-term dominance. Losses were avoided, reputations preserved, and thousands of jobs protected because one man refused to stay silent. Daniel's life changed, not overnight, but steadily. He was offered a position that respected his experience and his values, with hours that still allowed him to be a present father. His daughter noticed the change first, not in money, but in the lightness of his steps when he came home. The uniform disappeared, replaced by clothes that fit a man who had reclaimed his place in the world, yet he never forgot where he had stood when no one was looking. The CEO, for her part, addressed the company with a humility rarely seen at that level. She spoke about listening, about blind spots, and about the danger of believing that intelligence only wears suits. Policies changed. Anonymous feedback channels were strengthened. Respect became more than a slogan. The boardroom learned that day that wisdom does not announce itself with titles, and that the cost of ignoring quiet voices can be catastrophic. Daniel continued to clean occasionally, not because he had to, but because he chose to, reminding himself and others that dignity is not tied to position. He told his daughter the story one evening, not as a tale of heroism, but as a lesson in courage. He taught her that sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is speak one true sentence, even when your voice shakes. As this story nears its end, take a moment to comment below and share what this story made you feel, or a moment in your life when speaking up changed something important. Your words might inspire someone who is afraid to use their voice. And now, before we close, if this story touched your heart, moved you, or reminded you of the power of quiet integrity, please like, share, comment, and subscribe. Your engagement tells us these stories matter, and it helps them reach people who need hope. In a world obsessed with volume and status, Daniel's story reminds us that impact is not measured by how loudly you speak, but by how true your words are. A single sentence, spoken at the right moment, can halt empires, save futures, and remind us all that humanity still belongs in the boardroom.